Farnham. Morning to you. He also helped to coordinate volunteers at the height of the pandemic. So why do you think then that we need to stop with figures on social media?
Yeah, morning, Ashley. I just think, when you consider 80% of the population are vaccinated, it's clear that vaccines are doing their work. Whilst it's tragic that there was another death yesterday, hospitalizations are mercifully low. And actually, that is the number that we need. That's the metric that we need to focus on, because that is a good indication of the way our health department is managing to cope, and it's the way that we can have a clearer picture of what's actually going on. When you actually look at the numbers of people who have been recorded as having the virus in Jersey, that's 9,000 people over the course of the pandemic. Now, that's 9,000 known cases. Of course, there may be a lot more. We don't know the exact figure because lots of people may have had it and been asymptomatic or have very small amount of symptoms, so never got tested. So lots of those people will have some level of natural immunity as well. So I just think it's time to, the way you move on from this pandemic and get out of it is to stop focusing on the problem, to stop looking at this roller coaster of up and down figures, and start to focus on, when people talk about living with COVID, then part of living with COVID is just to absorb it into your activities of daily living, Ashley.
I think it's hard, isn't it? Because A, it's become a bit of a habit, and B, people do make their decisions based on the numbers. We've heard from some high-risk listeners who say the daily totals help them to decide whether they'll actually leave the house or not. Headway Jersey works with high-risk people too, doesn't it? Does it concern you that they might become more scared, maybe, and perhaps go the opposite way? We were calling it Freedom Day yesterday. Perhaps it's the opposite for them.
Exactly, and there were some really good, well thought out conversations that I got involved with yesterday on different social media channels. And some people did say, they found it for them was an indicator of how much of their daily life they could open up to, because they're in the high risk category, or for one reason or another they haven't had the vaccination. But what I'm saying is, lots of the behaviours that we've been doing over the last 18 months, as an island, as a community, will continue in some shape or form into the future. So, that necessarily shouldn't be hooked up to how many cases are in the community. What it should be hooked up to is, what is my level of personal risk? What level of risk am I prepared to take, or do I need to take? And that shouldn't necessarily just be driven by figures bouncing either up or down. I just think the figures, now that we understand that the vaccinations are doing their work, that the community is largely protected, it's time to capitalise on that. And the way that we move forward, and learn to live with the pandemic, is to stop looking at the figures. We've also got the situation where the vaccine program is being rolled out to a younger and younger audience, which is brilliant. So there should be no need to constantly look at these figures at 5 o'clock or first thing in the morning to see where we are as a community. We know the virus is still circulating in one shape or form. When children do return to school, it's likely that those figures will increase again, and that will be managed by the schools themselves. So I personally do think it's time to stop focusing.
Leo, what we understand Senator Farnham to mean when he was saying this on the programme yesterday is to stop pushing them out, like you say, at 5 o'clock. I do it. I make sure that, I've got a little notification that pops up on my phone. Right, okay, they're in. And there was that thing, wasn't there? If they were out a little bit late, does that mean that, the numbers have spiked? All that kind of anxiety around numbers. You're not saying don't have them on the website. You're saying perhaps don't push them out every day like we've become accustomed to.
Well, there is an element of that, but if you look at other jurisdictions, so Singapore is actively looking at stopping producing the figures altogether. And that for them is part of their exit strategy. And when I saw that, that was the initiative in Singapore, I thought, actually, yeah, perhaps we stop doing it on social media so actively, and at some point in the future we will have to stop as a community producing them all together. So perhaps not having them at such a high level is the first step towards some sort of new normality.
Isn't there concerns though about transparency. We often hear on the programme from listeners, concerns that they're not being told the full story by the government of Jersey. Wouldn't there be an argument to say, well, actually, keep them on the website, but it's down to you to choose whether or not you go and have a look every day?
Yeah, and if somebody really, really wants to make a decision on what they're going to do in the next day or the next week based on, what the risk is in the community, then if they want to actively pursue that number, then fine. But what I'm saying is actually, whether or not there's virus in the community and how much you're affected and how much the risk is, you should be taking those safe procedures in comparison to what your perceived level of risk is. And lots of high risk people will say, there are certain things that I won't do now for a long time, because for them, their lives are going to continue to be in this sort of vacuum for a long time. And if we're not pushing them out so actively, I think that would go some way to alleviating that problem, Ashley.
And you've also said the onus, is on the individual. As we've been saying, it's up to us to keep ourselves safe and make our own decisions. You were involved in coordinating volunteers last year, a really big effort. How important is it that people still work together to fight this? There's one thing making your own choices, but we still need to feel as though we're all in this together at a safe social distance,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a community problem still, and it's a shared problem. But ultimately, there needs to get to the point where individuals have to make the choices based on the risk, not just a bunch of numbers which are moving up or down. And I think when you see them on a Monday morning, some people go, or a Monday afternoon, some people go, look how many cases there are. And then someone has to point out, actually, we don't report over the weekend. So that's 3 days of cases. And then the nerves settle again. And I just think we're all getting focused on a number and the way that it's going. Whilst it is nice, and you can compare jurisdictions like Guernsey to see that they seem to be managing it better than us, ultimately, like I say, the main metric and the main figure to focus on is hospitalisations and people who are really being adversely affected by this disease. The rest is just numbers that are moving up and down on this roller coaster.
Thank you for your time. That was Malcolm Ferry there. He's from